Hello, everyone, and welcome to the September edition of the Wikimedia Research Showcase. I'm excited to be here today with some guest speakers. We have Michele Tizzoni from Fondazione Easy in Turin, Italy, who's going to be presenting on some pretty exciting piece of research we've done in collaboration with Wikimedia on monitoring the impact of health outbreaks on the public attention using Wikimedia and Wikipedia traffic data. And the second presentation is going to be by Jane Im from University of Michigan and Amy Zhang from MIT, presenting a big overview of RFCs, request for comments, one of the key processes for deliberation in Wikipedia and our communities, looking at what we can learn from this large corpus of online decisions. So without taking more time, the format is as usual. We're going to have about 30 minutes for each presentation, including Q&A, and you can stick around for a longer Q&A at the end of the session. Jonathan is going to be our IRC host, so if you have any questions on IRC or YouTube, please direct them at him and he'll relay them to the channel. And with that, Michele, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Dario. And thank you to the Wikimedia Foundation to giving me the opportunity to present work I've done in collaboration with colleagues at Fondazione Easy, the Institute for Scientific Interchange Foundation in Turin, Italy. So this is work done with my colleagues André, Panisson, Daniela, Paolotti, and Ciro, Cattuto, about the impact of news exposure on collective attention in the United States during the 2016 Zika virus epidemic. And as an introduction, the main idea of this study relies on the concept that it's known that behavioral responses during epidemic outbreaks can influence the spread of the disease dynamics. And awareness during epidemics is a key concept in epidemic modeling. And as it's shown in the picture, as an example, during a Middle East coronavirus outbreak in Seoul, in South Korea, in June 2015, the response, the behavioral response of the population was quite relevant to the outbreak. There's a large number of theoretical studies that tackle this concept and try to incorporate the behavioral responses into epidemic models of disease, of infectious disease spread. But actually, there are fewer empirical studies, mainly due to the lack of data and measures of awareness during outbreaks, that it's something that it's hard to quantify, and even more difficult is to quantify behavior changes during epidemics. So here I'm just citing a few key references to the subject, which is getting quite relevant in the literature, especially in the past 10 years. Most of the modeling approaches in epidemic modeling incorporate media exposure into the model structure to some kind of media function. So it's pretty clear that media play an important role in raising awareness of the public during outbreaks. And the typical assumptions of models is that media coverage increases as the incidence of the disease, the number of new cases grows in time. And at the same time, the susceptibility of individuals decreases as the media coverage becomes more alarmist. So the more cases there are of new infectious diseases, of an emerging disease, then the media coverage gets more alarmist, and then people will tend to stay home, to reduce their contacts, and thus reducing the spread of the disease somehow, and hampering the spread of the disease. And there's a good review I'm mentioning here on BMC Public Health about how many models are considering this type of effects of media exposure. In our study, we focused on a specific epidemic outbreak, that is the 2015-2016 Zika virus epidemic. The Zika virus is a mosquito-borne infection, is a virus transmitted by Aedes mosquitoes, and it's vector-borne, and also if transplacental and sexual transmission can occur. The infection is mild. In most of the infections remain asymptomatic, 80% of the cases, but actually can lead to severe complications, especially during pregnancy, because it causes microcephaly in newborns. And there is no vaccine or specific treatment, and it became so the worldwide attention started on Zika virus in 2015, when a first cluster of microcephaly cases in Brazil was associated to a Zika virus epidemic. And from 2015 onwards, the virus spread to the rest of the Americas and reached the US, reached in the end more than 47 countries in 2 years. And the WHO declared the epidemic a public health emergency of international concern on February 1st, 2016. And cases in the United States were first reported by the CDC at the beginning of 2016. The United States are a special case for the epidemic, because only a few states are actually could report local transmission because of the presence of the vector, especially Florida and Texas, where the states where most of the local cases were reported. Although all states in the contiguous United States reported cases because they were imported from abroad due to travel. So the research questions of our study was mainly how collective awareness and attention patterns to a public health threat such as Zika virus can be captured by digital sources in general, and how does media coverage shape the public attention during epidemics. And we tackled this question by combining different data sources. First of all, the Wikipedia page views data of selected 128 Zika-related articles, so mainly the Zika virus page and all translations in 94 languages. And these page views were geo-referenced, so page views that were geo-referenced in the US, in the United States, down to the level of city. Then we combined this information with a number of web news items, about 100,000 web news items citing the word Zika and the United States, from about 7,000 news sources in 2016. And this is data available from the GDELT project. Next, we consider also time spent mentions of Zika in TV programs that were aired in the United States in 2016. This is data available from the TV News Archive, and these are taken from closed captions of TV news programs aired in the United States. And finally, we linked this media coverage and attention patterns to the epidemic data, so the weekly Zika virus case counts reported by the United States by the Center for Disease Control. So just to give an overview of the time series of the temporal evolution of these four data sources, we see here in the four panels the daily Wikipedia page views of the pages under study, the TV mentions of the Zika word, and news items mentioning Zika over time. And we can see a clear pattern of all the three time series, with a huge spike at the beginning in February, corresponding to the declaration of the WHO of an international health alert, while after March, more or less, the attention on Wikipedia decreases. And even though in summer there is again news covering the Zika outbreak again, especially due to the Olympics in Brazil that were also raising concerns for the public health, the attention remains low on Wikipedia page views, and it doesn't get back to the peaks of the beginning. At the same time, it's very interesting to see that the Zika cases reported by the Center for Disease Control, the red curve, are actually increasing over time, reaching a peak exactly in summer 2016, with a very different pattern compared to the attention and news coverage time series. And this is clear from correlations. If we measure correlation of time series, all the Wikipedia page views and the news items in the TVs are highly correlated with a Pearson's correlation coefficient higher than 0.7, while the correlation of the free time series with the Zika virus incidence is almost negligible, and it's very small. There is only a weak correlation with news items, but actually the correlation with the Wikipedia page views is actually negative. So this suggests that the attention measured by Wikipedia is actually not much driven by the epidemic incidence, by the epidemic profile of the disease. And this picture remains the same also if we look at the 50 states. So all the Wikipedia page views time series were highly correlated across the 50 states in the United States. So here I'm showing a cross-correlation table where we can see basically the time series, the Wikipedia page view time series in each state, and the level of correlation with the Wikipedia page view time series of all the other states. And we see that the correlation is all above 0.8 for all the states. So basically there is there is a high correlation across states, and also correlation, of course, with the national timeline, which is above 0.8. So the attention measured by the Wikipedia page views was synchronized over time and in space across the United States. There is only one case, quite special, of Montana, that is the only state for which there is a slight correlation with Zika virus cases reported in that state, while on the other hand, for all the other states, the correlation between the attention patterns and the Zika virus cases reported in that state are not significant. So it really seems also that at the different spatial resolutions, the attention is not much driven, again, by the number of cases reported. We also looked more specifically at attention patterns in cities of the United States. So we looked at a higher granular resolution in space, and we looked more specifically at about 800 cities in the US with a population larger than 40,000, and we ranked those cities by the relative attention to Zika virus pages compared to the total page view that was observed in the whole 2016 to all the Wikipedia pages. So we compared how much the page view to Zika were ranked higher or lower with respect to the global rank on Wikipedia page views for that city. And in that case, some patterns start to emerge. And for instance, if we look at the cities where the attention was the highest, so the top 10% of cities in attention, we clearly see that they are most in Florida. So here in this case, we can see that at the city level, there is a correlation with the risk of infection. So where those places, especially the area of Miami, for instance, was at high risk of local transmission of the disease, and where the largest number of cases was reported. At the same time, cities with the lowest pattern of attention, so with the lowest attention to the disease, were cities that were quite far from the area most at risk, like in the Midwest, for instance. So to conclude our study, what we did was to try to model the Wikipedia page viewership by a linear regression model that includes all these media signals and at the state level and weekly. So what we wanted to model here is the number of page views to Zika-related Wikipedia pages by week in each state of the United States. And we want to predict this value by only using the TV mentions of Zika and the mentions of Zika in news at the national level. So what we want to do is to model the Wikipedia page viewership not as a time series analysis in this sense, but week by week predict the number of page views only based on the number of mentions of TV on TV programs and the number of mentions of Zika in news, and to explain in details this the model we are using, the modeling approach we are using. So what we do is to model the Wikipedia page views scaled by the state population. Because of course the volume of page views is proportional to the population of each state, and actually we find that this relation is slightly superlinear, and at the same time we predict this number as a linear growth with the media signal. So as a combination of a linear combination of the TV media coverage, the news at the national level, and also the news at the state level. News at the state level means news that mention Zika and a specific state. So of course we predict the page views to grow with the number of mentions of Zika in media outlets. At the same time, as we have seen that we observed from the time series that the page viewership, the attention to Wikipedia pages decreases over time, and this does not increase again, even if during summer the news were increasing. This suggested us that there is some kind of memory effect, and this is also something that is known in the literature. Then of course people look at Wikipedia pages once when there's something new, but then they don't go back again to the Wikipedia pages because they already know about the matter. So of course there is some kind of memory effect that we incorporate into the model by including an exponential kernel that basically dumps the response to news after over a certain time frame, where here the memory kernel is dumped exponentially with a time scale tau that basically gives us the average average time scale over which the memory takes place, the memory effect takes place. And here we consider two different components of the memory effect. So a memory effect on the TV signal and the memory effect on the news signal. And we do this week by week, separately and state by state. So what we do is we do the prediction state-wise using a k-fold cross-validation with k equal to 5, and what we found in the end is actually the model performs very well across all the states. If we consider states with a population larger than 1 million individuals, the model is able to predict quite well with an R-squared that is on average of 0.76, but it gets higher, for instance, in Texas or Illinois. It predicts very well the number of page views week by week. And as I said before, this is not it does not take into account previous weeks on the same time series, right? So it's only based on the number of news and TV items that we see each week separately. And so the model gets pretty accurate, but what is also most interesting to see is that actually the model it gets really pretty accurate when we only consider TV or web news together without the memory effect. So the average R-square it's already of 0.6. And basically, we compared all the combination of the features. So we train our model by including all the features that I described before, one by one, and then by adding them together, combining them together, and basically a model that includes all the features. Performs only slightly better than a model that includes only the TV. The TV signal, the web news, and the memory on the web news, or the memory on the TV. So in the end, we see that the media signal is highly informative already at the very basic level of the page view dynamics at state level. And this is again the TV and news sources at the national level are already highly informative. To conclude my presentation, what we have seen is that Wikipedia page view data can be used to measure attention during a public health threat, and this was also already initially studied by some previous works. What we have done here is that we have done it at the higher spatial granularities, and we've seen that at all spatial granularities, attention seems to be mainly driven by media outlets. And more in general, the correlation with the incidence of the disease was found to be weak. And this is contrary to what are the typical assumptions of several theoretical models that actually expect the attention to grow with the incidence of the disease. And of course, we need to consider several peculiarities of these specific studies, especially the fact that the Zika virus, as I mentioned, is a vector-borne disease that usually has mild symptoms and a low transmissibility. So it is a very peculiar infection, and of course, other diseases like flu or measles or Ebola, for instance, could lead to potentially to very different dynamics of attention patterns. And at the same time, it's important to know that we looked at attention patterns, but we didn't make empirical links with behavioral changes. This is something that is still missing in our case, and that would be very interesting to do with some additional data sets at our hands. And of course, I would like to acknowledge my colleagues at SI Foundation again, and also colleagues at Wikimedia Foundation that helped us in the setting the problem and in the study, and also thanks to the open access policy for the data of Wikimedia Foundation. And there is a preprint available if you are interested into knowing more about the study. You can find it at the link here online. And thank you very much for the attention, and I will be happy to answer questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the great presentation, Michele. I'm going to ask Jonathan first if there are questions from the channel or from the room. I have a few, but I'm going to keep them for later.
No questions from the channel at the moment.
I'm going to start chiming in with some of my questions. So something we discussed during the making of the study, Michele. So first off, I guess there's a question that you mentioned in passing about the relation between population and page views being superlinear. That's something that we discussed briefly during, an early version of the study. And I was wondering if you could expand on that and also add some thoughts maybe about the relation between population, but also issues such as internet penetration and connectivity. To what extent we can take basically population as a good indicator of what level of traffic we'll observe for these topics coming from a given state or country.
Yeah, sure. So I would say regarding the internet penetration, yeah, of course, in the United States, we can assume that it's high or like kind of almost equal across states. And that's the resolution we are looking at. We think so. The idea of looking at the scaling with the population comes from the fact that it's been observed in several studies, several important studies, especially those led by Louis Bettencourt, that several of these human activities, like crime or number of patents or other indicators of human activity, scale superlinearly with population size at the level of cities. And actually, we tested this. I would not say I would say quite extensively, and found that. Actually, this holds true also for Wikipedia page views, and we use that to inform our prediction model, in a sense that we target in our prediction Wikipedia page views rescaled by population with a superlinear scaling factor. Although this was not the aim of our study, so actually it would be very interesting to investigate more on whether this is true not only for the United States, of course, but also across countries, because then actually, as you mentioned, there are other factors that might play an important role, and I'm sure they play an important role. So I'm not sure that this is true for countries where, of course, the internet penetration rate varies a lot across cities, for instance, or it's very, very low in general, and also this should be considered also as something to investigate, depending on other features like the type of access to the page or things like that. But yeah, I would say in the end, the fact that the page view scales superlinearly with population is interesting and is in line with a huge literature on the subject that about scaling of human activity with population size.
Cool, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more quick question from Chris, and we'll save more for the second Q&A.
Thank you. I'll ask that. So I'll just read what I put here in chat. So I was wondering if there was any information about how viewers of these pages on Wikipedia on Zika are actually interacting or using that information, and if there are any specific behaviors known, what factors might be associated with those kinds of interactions, or might be predictive of those interactions. And as an example, one thing I thought that could happen is someone could continue to click through like a link on there, whether that's an internal link to Wikipedia or some reference that's cited on a relevant page.
Right. We haven't used such kind of information, so we really looked only at the number of Wikipedia page views. I know. I mean, I know there is information about user behavior, so it's potentially available, and would be very, very interesting to understand that and model that kind of interaction during outbreaks. That would be very, very interesting to somehow discriminate on the why people actually visit the page, and for sure also their main reason for visiting those pages changes during the outbreak. So at the very beginning it will be led by interest for something new, and then over towards the end of the outbreak there will be other reasons, maybe more health related or what. So there's a lot to explore in this area, I would say. We just really looked on a very simple question, in a sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a quick shameless plug, because it sounds like super relevant to this question. So it turns out that we just started a few weeks ago a new project that starts to look precisely at this question. So one is characterizing the usage of citation, like when readers follow citations in general and external links. But there's one specifically with a team we're collaborating with that's looking at the role of Wikipedia as a gateway to medical and health-related information. And so I think we're going to have some solid answers to that question, looking at specifically these patterns of interaction, not related to a specific outbreak, but in general, like interaction with articles in the context of medicine and health-related information. So stay tuned. All right, thanks again, Michele. Again, please stick around. There might be additional questions at the end of the session. And we're going to transition to Jane. I think Jane is the one who's going to be presenting. Am I right?
Yes.
All right, fantastic.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll start. Hello everyone, my name is Jane M, and today I'll be presenting about deliberation and resolution on Wikipedia, a case study of requests for comment. I'll first introduce the team members. I'm a newly starting PhD student at University of Michigan, and I did this work while at Korea University. The other members are Amy Zhang, PhD student at MIT CCL, Christopher Schilling, member of Wikimedia Foundation, David Karger, professor at MIT CCL, and Jonathan Morgan, member of Wikimedia Foundation. Today, I'll be talking about requests for comment. So what are they? Requests for comment is a major and common process used by Wikipedia editors for requesting input from uninvolved editors in order to solve content-related disputes. So it's basically a way of getting help from outside in order to solve a content dispute that's not being resolved locally. And the request for comment process consists of initiation, discussion, and one of the three outcomes, which I'll be explaining shortly. Let's start with an example. So here is a request for comment started by an editor about an unresolved dispute about whether the lead paragraph of Donald Trump's page should say he's the current president or not. And after this RFC has been initiated, we can see editors coming in, writing down their opinions and along with the reasons and sources. After this deliberation has run fully, we can see an uninvolved editor who we call the closer come in and formally closing the request for comment. The closer evaluates the consensus of the discussion and writes it down as a closing statement at the right top gray box. We can see that the closer here has evaluated that the discussion's consensus is to include that Donald Trump is the current president on the Donald Trump's page. Here we can see that this request for comment has been closed and the deliberation has been met with a consensus, with the dispute being resolved. And this is a very ideal case of a request for comments ending, but we found out that it does not always happen to all RFCs. A request for comment can meet one of the three endings, and the example we just previously showed is a case when the request for comment is formally closed by a closer and the dispute being resolved. However, there are cases when a request for comment is not formally closed, like this one here. This is a request for comment about whether to enlarge section on policies on Bernie Sanders' page, and it is currently left without a formal closure. Among requests for comments like these, however, there are some that are still informally ended, usually by a participant and an initiator who thinks that there's already an obvious consensus and there's no need to further discuss, or there's no need for a further formal closure. And here we can see that the dispute is also resolved. The problematic case is when the request for comment is left stale, ended and closed by nobody. In this case, the dispute is not resolved and the deliberation is left stale. For example, this is part of a request for comment that is left stale, and we can see an editor referring to the stale RFC as another sad Wikipedia fail. And we found out that actually many requests for comments meet these sad endings. We found out that roughly a third of requests for comments are stale without any closure. And we also found that many that do get formally closed do not get closed in a timely fashion. So the average period of a request for comment open up to the formal closure was about 45 days. And this is 1.5 times more than the time period a request for comment is allowed to be opened by default. So it appears that many requests for comments are stale. So why are they a problem? First, they can be discouraging to editors if a request for comment never gets closed when they have put a lot of effort into it. It basically means wasted labor. Second, they can be a problem for productivity as editors involved in requests for comments may wait on the outcome before further editing. So the next natural question is, why do many requests for comments remain stale? And to answer this question, we did a number of things which I'll be presenting in the rest of the talk. And we believe this constitutes the first study of investigating the process and issues of requests for comments. And I'll continue by explaining how we got the data. So first, we had a quantitative study where we gathered and analyzed 7,316 requests for comments from the English language Wikipedia since 2011 to 2017. We built models predicting request for comments outcomes using this data. Second, we had a qualitative study where we interviewed frequent tent closers, and we also inspected 40 randomly chosen stale requests for comments from the dataset in order to find out why many RFCs remain stale. We also consulted with 2 members of the Wikimedia Foundation and discussed this study on Wikimedia's research mailing list. To further describe about the RFC discussion and closing dataset, we first used the revision history of talk pages provided by the MediaWiki API and the edits of a bot that manages requests for comments. We gathered the URL of the original page where the request for comment was started at. However, one problem is that threads on Wikipedia gets archived when time passes by. So we iterated through the archives to find the current version of the URL of the RFC. And using the URL, we retrieved and parsed the request for comments content using libraries like Wikichatter. In total, we grabbed about 7,300 requests for comments, and we extracted initiator, participant, closer information, and comments, initiating and closing statements. We also kept the reply structure intact using Python libraries. Now I'll provide a description of requests for comments over time, including their issues, using the dataset that I just explained about. First, here's a graph showing the number of requests for comments initiated each month from 2011 to 2017. Although we can see a sharp increase in 2011, we assume that's because that's the point when the bot managing RFCs became active. So overall, we can see a steady volume of requests for comments being initiated, about 60 to 120 per month. We also found out that closers are first, they're more experienced than initiators and participants. For instance, they have a higher number of average edits made on Wikipedia. Second, we found out that there's a smaller number of closers compared to initiators and participants. This may imply that not everyone closes. So we found that there's a steady volume of usage of requests for comments with experienced editors as closers. Now let's get back to the main question, the major issues we found in the RFC process. To recap, first, we found that many requests for comments, that is, a third of them, are stale. Second, we found that among RFCs that are formally closed, many of them are not closed with a timely fashion. It took actually about 17 days since the last comment up to the formal closure. And this is a graph showing the timelines of all the RFCs in our data set. And the yellow line shows the time between the opening and last comment, while the blue line shows the time since the last comment up to the formal closing statement, if there is one. And we can see crazy outliers existing here. We can see RFCs that took a long time to close after the last comment. And we also can see RFCs that just dragged on and on, not being formally closed. And among them, there were many RFCs that were stale. So why are many requests for comment stale? Now, I'll explain the reasons we found behind the stale RFCs. To recap the methods, first, we conducted interviews with 10 frequent closers on English Wikipedia. And second, we had a qualitative analysis of randomly selected 40 stale RFCs from our dataset. So in total, we found 5 reasons behind stale RFCs. And the first one is related to problems with initiators and initial proposals. Among the 40 RFCs, we found that some of them contained too vague initial proposals, making it hard for newcomers to further participate in the RFC. And the interviewees also mentioned that they found unclosed RFCs, mainly some of them due to having no clear question in the initial proposal. In a more severe case, we found initiators using biased words in the initial proposals, trying to solicit participation in an unfair way, and editors would not participate further in this case, making it more likely for the RFC to become stale. Second reason is related to behavior of participants. Among the 40 RFCs, we found some of them having excessive bickering, which led to long and complicated threads with lots of back and forths, which made it hard for newcomers to come and examine the content and further participate. In a more severe case, we found out that some participants became sock puppets, which means that they create multiple accounts in order to sway the discussion in their favor. And interviewees mentioned that they would not close when they are suspicious that there was sock puppeting going on. The next case is related to lack of interest or expertise from uninvolved editors. Among the 40 stale RFCs we examined, we found that some of them didn't contain explicit meta-comments about why the RFC remained stale. But among them, we found that some had small participation from new uninvolved editors. This implies that if an RFC does not gain much interest from the outside editors, it's likely to be more stale. And interviewees mentioned that when they find an RFC that they believe that not many editors care about, they sometimes just pass it by and not close it, thinking they can't create an impact by closing the RFC anyways. This category also includes the case when the request for comment requires a certain amount of background that not many closers have. The interviewees mentioned that they sometimes do not close the RFC because they feel that they do not have the expertise needed to understand and close the request for comment. This implies that if request for comment is in an area that not many closers are aware of, then it's more likely to become stale. The next reason is related to the RFC being too complicated or contentious. The interviewees mentioned that they sometimes find requests for comments containing huge amount of comments and where the feelings are running very high. And they told us that in this kind of situation, they will not close it and leave it to someone who's more experienced or a closer with more authority. Interviewees also mentioned that there were just some cases when they couldn't just understand the request for comment because it was too complicated. The last reason is related to interpersonal issues and Wikipolitics. Just like anyone else, Wikipedia editors also have interpersonal issues. And interviewees mentioned that they sometimes would not close an RFC because they have a bad relationship with an initiator or a participant. So up to now, we have these findings from the interviews and qualitative inspection of 40 RFCs. Now I'll be explaining how to incorporate these findings into building models for predicting request for comments outcome. Our goals of building models is to first, we want to understand the features that can help us predict whether a request for comment will go stale. Second, we want to help initiator and participants take action to prevent stale RFCs. And considering that we want them to take action beforehand and that features change over time, we also need to build timely models. When I mean by building a model, I mean by building a predictor which needs feature selection For this step, we'll use the 5 reasons we found through the qualitative study. And after that, we'll train the classifiers using those features. So in total, we came up with 61 features grouped into 8 categories. And the first one is related to initiator's experience. So during the qualitative study, we found that problems with initiators and initial proposals, for example, the proposal being too vague or the initiator using biased words, can negatively affect an RFC's outcome. And we thought this was potentially connected to the initiator's level of expertise. And therefore, we calculated features like the number of edits made by the initiator on Wikipedia and whether the initiator is an admin. Next, we also considered participants' interest. We learned from the qualitative study that if an RFC does not gain much interest from editors, it's likely to become more stale. Therefore, we calculated features like number of participants of RFCs and the ratio of new participants to the top page where the RFC is at, thinking these two reflect participants' level of interest. Next, we also considered participants' experience. We learned from the qualitative study that behavior participants can impact an RFC's outcome, such as sock puppeting and bickering. Therefore, we considered features like the age of the Wikipedia count of participants and the number of edits made by the participants on Wikipedia. Next, we considered size and shape of discussion. We learned that if an RFC is too long or too complicated with lots of back and forths, it can scare away closers. Considering this, we calculated features like number of comments of an RFC and the average depth of replies per comment. Next, we consider contentiousness. We also learned during the qualitative study that if an RFC is too contentious, it can also scare closers away. Therefore, we calculated features like number of supports and opposed votes in RFCs and weighted reciprocity. Next, we considered tone of participants' discourse. We learned that behavior of participants like bickering can impact an RFC's outcome, and therefore we calculated various tones including hostility, anger, cognition, and certainty. We also considered initial proposals' tone and length. We learned that problems with initial proposals, for example, they can be too vague or too short, that we learned that they can negatively affect an RFC's outcome. So we calculated features like number of words in the proposal and the same tone-related features that I mentioned previously. Last but not the least, we considered popularity of RFC and its topic. We learned from the qualitative studies that if an RFC has lack of interest from editors concerning its topic, then it's likely to be stale. Therefore, we considered features like number of words in the RFC, thinking it reflects the popularity of the RFC. And we also considered features like number of revisions made on the top page where the request for comment is started at before the RFC initiation, thinking it reflects the popularity of the RFC's topic. So using these 61 features, we built 4 types of models using logistic regression, adaptive boosted decision trees, random forests, and support vector machines using radial basis function kernel. The baseline here is just predicting close for every RFC, and it reaches 67% of accuracy. We can see that the adaptive boosted decision trees perform the best overall, except the recall score, and it reaches about 75% accuracy. This is about 8% increase over the baseline performance. We also built classifiers using features per each category because we wanted to know which category was the most important. And we can see that the size and shape of discussion was the most important category, followed by participant experience and participants' interest. And this is the top 14 features in the ADT model incorporating all data. And we also can see the correlation between each feature and closure. And the red boxed ones are the ones that I'm going to be talking about. First, we can see that all features related to size and shape of discussion were included in the top 14 features. Interestingly, the number of comments and the average reply depth of comments had a negative correlation with closure, while the average number of replies had a positive one. This may imply that if a thread is too complicated and long with lots of back and forths, it might scare away closers. However, a certain level of interest, which can be signaled through the average number of replies, can be beneficial for an RFC to avoid staleness. We also found out that number of participants, which is related to participant interest, was also included in the top 14 and had a positive correlation with closure, also implying that a certain level of interest of participants can be beneficial to an RFC's outcome. Lastly, we found that almost all features related to participants' experience were included in the top 14, with all of them having a positive correlation. This may imply that experienced participants may help an RFC to avoid staleness. On the other hand, it may imply that experienced editors may know which RFCs are likely to be closed out of experience and participate in them. So up to now, we trained and tested the models using our entire dataset. However, considering that one of our goals is to help initiator and participants to prevent RFC staleness, our next question that we have to answer is, how soon after an RFC is initiated can we predict the likelihood of closure reasonably? So for this, we used all 61 features that I previously explained, and also using a new feature, which is the number of days since the last comment up to the current time. And we built models using features immediately after initiation, after 1 week, after 2 weeks, and up to 11 weeks. And this is the result of the timely models we built. The x-axis shows the number of weeks after RFC initiation, while the y-axis shows the accuracy level. And the pink and purple lines each stand for the accuracy level of baselines for predicting just close for every RFC, and predicting unclosed for every RFC, while the other 4 lines stand for the accuracy level of the 4 types of models we built. And the first takeaway from this graph is that we can predict above 70% accuracy as early as 1 week after initiation, with the ADT model and random forest performing the best. Second, we see that the baseline for predicting closed for every RFC decreasing and the baseline for predicting unclosed increasing over time. This is because for every time point, we only consider RFCs that are not closed yet. So as time passes by, some requests for comments become closed and we discard them from the dataset. This makes the ratio of unclosed RFCs increase, making the baseline of predicting unclosed for every RFC increase. And in the 6th week, we can see that it's a 50-50 chance for both baselines. And our best models improve over the baseline by over 15%, with the random forest and logistic regression performing the best. The implication of timely models is that they show which features are important at a time point, along with the prediction of outcome. Therefore, initiator and participants can take actions using these top features. For example, let's say after 2 weeks, the models show that participants' expertise level is crucial in order for an RFC to become closed. So participants see this and they can invite experienced editors to the discussion in order to increase the likelihood of the RFC to become closed and avoid staleness. To summarize our contributions, first, we created a new comprehensive dataset of requests for comments, and anyone can access and download the dataset using this link. Second, we found that roughly a third of requests for comments do not get closed at all, remaining stale, and many do not get closed within time. Third, we conducted a qualitative study showing insight from the closers themselves as to why many requests for comments remain stale. And last but not the least, we built new models to help predict which requests for comments are likely to go stale, and also timely models that help initiator and participants take action. A paper on this work was accepted to CSCW 2018, and anyone can download it using this link. And these are the mail addresses of mine and Amy's. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks for the great talk, Jane. I'm going to pass it on to Jonathan for questions. If Jonathan is still around and can hear us. Well, I'll start with one here. While he's coming back, I really appreciated the design recommendations or policy recommendations towards the end of the presentation. I think they're very clear and actionable. One general question that I have, which is similar to what we've seen in the past, where obviously there's a different participation in these governance spaces from newcomers as opposed to experienced editors. All of the data that you have points at the fact that the higher likelihood of closure when more experienced editors are participating, and the negative effect of length. To me, these two data points really suggest that we're creating barriers for newcomers to participate in this conversation. I think the second point is very much related to the work that also Amy has been doing on the importance of summarization for people who are not already familiar with an existing discussion. So I'm curious in general about your thoughts about participation from newcomers in this specific type of discussions. If you have any additional insights, what is desirable? I mean, there are, I guess there are questions about at what point in somebody's tenure on Wikipedia it is appropriate to participate in this governance discussion.
So your question is about my thoughts on newcomers' participation and request for comment.
Correct. Yes.
So I, from the interviews, it felt that the interviewees felt anyone is allowed to participate in request for comments. However, from the studies results, I thought that it would be great if there's a way for newcomers to get feedback from maybe more experienced editors on how to participate in request for comments. During the interviews, there was an interesting point that editors learn from other experienced editors while participating by looking at the way how more experienced editors use sources, reliable sources, and newcomers seem to learn from by looking at them while participating in the discussion. And I thought maybe if there's a way for newcomers to get more maybe active feedback on how to participate in requests for comments from more experienced people, maybe that would be a great way for to improve a lot of requests for comments outcome. Yeah, that was my general thought.
Yeah, and what Jane was saying is, I think, basically even more pronounced when it comes to the role of closer. So, newcomers may feel concerned about participating in an RFC, but for taking that leap to actually try and close an RFC, which right now anyone can do, it's not something that only admins can do. There's definitely a barrier there for people who are new to the process.
Makes no sense. Thank you. I know that Jonathan, by the way, is having some technical problems coming back in, so I think we'll try and we'll see what happens. I want to open up the stage for others. So Chris, if you're around, if you had additional questions, and I'll check IRC.
I did have one thing I could add to that question of yours, actually. The other thing I think that is acting as a barrier to participation, either in terms of closure or just getting involved with RFCs in general, involves just understanding guidelines and policy and how to engage in kind of not necessarily argumentation, but discussion around those. I think to the extent that we can encourage people to participate in RFCs that are perhaps not as guideline and policy heavy, that is a possible gateway for people to kind of get started, because there are certainly proposals that don't rely on really heavy or nuanced understanding of of editorial policies and guidelines. Alternatively, if we had a better way to teach people about policies and guidelines, because I am very reluctant as a English Wikipedia editor to just throw people into those pages. To the extent that we can present those in a more accessible way, those are two ways I think that can help people become more involved in these in this discussion process, in this kind of proposal process.
There are currently no questions on IRC. Sorry, I dropped out suddenly. I have a question for the speaker if no one else does. Are there any other questions from the room?
Looks like there is one question from the YouTube live chat, Jonathan.
Oh boy.
I just put it in the chat log. I'm happy to read the question.
Oh, I've got it.
Or if you'd like to.
I've got it. This question comes from James Salzman. Are there any features other than hostile tone of initial proposal that have to do with the initial proposal, ergo cognitive tone or hostile tone, or affective tone?
Well, we tried out all the tones for the initial proposals as well, but it turned out that other than the hostility of the initial proposal, nothing was included in the top 14. So it seemed that it was the most important tone of the initial proposal. Yeah.
Excellent. And so personally, I'm always curious about design directions. One thing and I apologize if this was asked when I was booted out of the meet, but when it comes to helping Wikimedians and potential closers assess how to support a discussion that seems to be running down without consensus, or try to move it in a more positive direction, with machine learning models, having the models output its predictions is one thing, but there's also been a lot of interest recently around making interpretable models that allow end users to understand something about the decision-making process and making that information available to them in a way that will allow them to make more productive decisions. I wondered if you had any thoughts about that in this context.
So I think that goes along with the implications that I explained about the timely models. So with the timely models, they not only show the likelihood of whether an RFC will be still or not at a certain time point, but they also can provide insights on which features are important at that time point. Mm-hmm. So in the, for example, which is an example that I showed in the presentation, if like after 1 or 2 weeks, the timely models show that the participants' experience is the most top important feature for an RFC to become closed, then the participants can see that and, oh, we need more experienced editors, and maybe send invitations throughout Wikipedia to more experienced editors and get their neutral suggestions on the RFC to improve the likelihood. Yeah, so I think that's a great implication for the timely models.
And do you think that have you given any thought to how you might evaluate the effectiveness of this model in use cases like that?
I see. To evaluate, I guess, if I were to evaluate, I think I would try to first find RFCs where this model wasn't used, this tool wasn't used, and then also get another data set where this model was used and try to compare those over time. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are, many cases of RFCs out there where the people that are participating or the initiator are really interested in getting it closed, and they might post to the administrator's notice board kind of asking for participation, but may not get the kind that they're hoping to get. And if that's the case, it would be great to be able to find them or for them to find this work and think about additional strategies for getting input.
That's great. Thank you.
And this also me thinking aloud. We've never tested, as far as I know, these kind of interventions on talk pages or deliberation-related pages, such as RFCs or AFDs, RFAs or whatnot. But I'm just wondering if one could test, with a model like this and plugging into a bot that basically would post on the top page at the specific point in time, like we have a we have a high confidence that this RFC is not going to close unless we bring in more domain experts, or unless we diversify the participation rate, or if any of the recommendations you presented in your results. I'm just wondering, this is like a big question, not just empirical, but also from a community standpoint, a question to figure out if a bot intervening in such a stage to sort of like nudge or redirect a discussion with a stated goal of maximizing the chances that it might be closed is something desirable. We've never done that. I'm just thinking aloud that this is something that potentially a bot could do if we find a community willing to experiment with that.
Yeah, I think that would be a really great usage for the models we built. Like Amy and I, we found out that bot is like one of the main tool used in Wikipedia for sending out notices. And we also know that a bot is currently used in notifying some random people about the RFCs. But if like this model was used to maybe get the right audience to participate in the RFCs, I think that would be a great use case.
Nice.
Yeah. So there is kind of this bot that you can subscribe to the bot and tell it how many like maximum requests that you want per month or something, and the bot will just randomly go through and alert you about an RFC. And we haven't done the details to look at how effective that bot is, but it would be interesting to see that. Another thing is actually right now when an RFC is looking to get closed, there isn't a very good mechanism for publicizing that. So there is a request for closure page, and right now there's kind of a few editors, maybe like one major editor who's actually going through and manually posting those to that notice board, which maybe that could be a more standardized process where if this person stopped doing it, it would probably stop happening. So yeah.
Oh, and there's one more question.
Yeah, one more question. I'll read it for archival purposes. This is another one from James Salzman. Did you measure the number of incoming links to the RFC section? I suspect that a lot of RFCs die because they aren't advertised in wiki projects and Wikipedia Central Notice Board, etc.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. We actually figured that, this feature might be a really important one because we noticed that people really try to advertise them, but if there's like a difference of some RFCs that don't get advertised actively, maybe that is a major reason why they become stale. But unfortunately for this study, we weren't able to measure the number of incoming links. And the main reason was because we couldn't find a really clean way to do this. So we found some advertisements on various places, but we couldn't find a really clear rule to get a really clean set of the advertisements. So that was one main reason why we couldn't measure the number.
Excellent, thank you.
It sounds like subscribers to that bot does initial notifications, like looking distribution of types of editors that are subscribing to that bot and receiving these notifications, which I presume is mostly skewed towards experienced editors. It's going to give us some insights into how people discover an RFC. But I agree that's a very important point. Sweet, we're almost going to a close. Want to check if there are any additional questions. I had one for Michele, if he's still around, just to close this. because I didn't get a chance to ask him before. So Michele, give me a sign. Oh, you're still there. Okay, yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, still there.
So one thing that I find fascinating about that study is also very relevant is like this issue, like this divergence between incidence and attention, right? And I think that's something that probably will be studying more and more, given the current way in which information is, propagated over various channels and social media. I mentioned to you recently there was this case of a hoax of a non-existent Ebola outbreak in Italy, which apparently is making the rounds on Italian social media, and also is being used for political purposes. I'm just curious if you think this method you use here in the case of Zika could be meaningfully used and adapted to study the spread of hoaxes related to public health threats, lacking any actual incidents in the area where these hoaxes are spreading.
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's a very good point. I think this is, I think the specific case of hoaxes related to infectious disease outbreaks hasn't been investigated much, and this would be very relevant to study. I think nobody has really a clear idea of the impact on attention of this type of misinformation, and definitely, as our study shows, I mean, the attention is driven significantly by what people read on the web, at least on web news. That was what we mentioned. But it would be nice to have other data sources, the type of you mentioned. So other like social media mentions of the disease, and whether these are more significant drivers than the actual infection epidemic spread in this case. So I would say, this would be very interesting to study as a follow-up of our work.
Sweet, thank you.
Thank you.
And awesome. With that, I think we're almost at time. So I want to again thank you, all of our speakers. Thanks for joining us today. Please remember to share a copy of the deck so we can upload it and share it with our audience. And see you all next month for the next showcase. Bye, everyone.